Have you heard statements like, the DA is far to the right, or the EFF is far to the left, or is MK Party left or right, and where does the ANC stand on the left-right spectrum? What do these terms left and right actually mean, and how do they apply to South Africa? Let's find out. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. I'm Mpofu-Walsh, and it's great to have you back on board. Now, we're taking a step back in this episode from the political theatre of South Africa to give you an episode that really breaks down a certain concept in South African politics. And in particular, I want to explain how I view the question of left and right in South African politics. Now, this debate has emerged recently largely around the MK Party, where a number of people say that the MK Party is a left party or a party of the left. There's been a big debate about whether the EFF should be characterized as left or not, and others characterizing the ANC as on the right or the DA as on the right. Now, a lot of people come up to me who watch the channel and say, we get that like you're unpacking all of these concepts, but actually, can you explain the concepts themselves so that we can understand them? And so that's what I want to do today. I'm going to give you a scale for how to rate left and right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rank each political party depending on whether they're on the left or the right of South African politics, and we'll do that for the top 4 political parties. And hopefully this will be the most comprehensive analysis of what left and right mean that you can watch, and of the South African political spectrum for you. So here's, in part number 1, how I define left and right. I define left and right along 4 different dimensions. And this is a mistake that I think a lot of people make, is they only use one dimension. So let me tell you the 4 dimensions, and then I'll explain what each of them are. Now, if someone is pro-racial justice, pro-gender equality, pro-LGBTQIA plus rights, they would typically be on one side of the social left and right spectrum. If someone is anti-racial justice or racial redress, anti-LGBTQIA plus rights, anti-gender equality, they're on another spectrum. But that's only one dimension, which I will call the social spectrum. So in terms of social issues, identity, social politics, we have one spectrum, and we have a left and a right of that spectrum. Cool, so that's one. Let's come to the second one. If someone believes in democracy, if they believe in more direct forms of democracy, that people should have a say over who governs them, then they are on the political left. If people or a person doesn't agree with democracy, they think there should be an authoritarian dictator, that the masses are not wise or educated enough to have a say over their own lives, then they would fall on the political right. So that's the second dimension, the political dimension, where you stand on basically how a society should organize itself and who gets a say in how they are governed. So we've done 2 so far. Remember, we're talking about 4 different dimensions of left and right. We've got the social left and right. We've got the political left and right. Okay, now that we've done those 2, let's come to the third dimension. And that is, let me break it down again. If you believe that the state should play a role in the economy, if you believe that wealth should be redistributed from the rich to the poor, if you believe that historical wealth inequalities should be adjusted in the present, if you believe that there is a big role for the state in the economy, you're on the economic left. But if you believe that the government should be limited, if you believe that the free market should be expanded to its largest possible potential, if you believe in privatization rather than state ownership, then you are on largely the economic right. So we have 3 dimensions now of our 4. We've got the social left and right, we've got the political left and right, we've got the economic left and right. What's the last left and right? Well, in my view, it's actually foreign policy or global politics. So if you support global powers being able to intervene, if you are happy about things like colonialism or wars, or one country being able to invade another country and go to war with that country to preserve order and stability, then you are largely on the right of foreign policy. If you support US intervention, largely European intervention, but not just those interventions, but if you support intervention generally, you are largely on the right. If you want to consolidate global order as it is, so you don't believe that other countries should have a say in the Security Council, that the institutions of the global order are appropriately constituted, you're on the right of foreign policy. By contrast, if you think that colonialism has shaped the international system, if you disagree with foreign interventions, and you think that countries should largely take charge of their own affairs and other countries shouldn't go to war with them or intervene with them, if you believe that international institutions should be reformed to a greater representation of countries from the global south, then you are largely on the left of foreign or international affairs. So, what we have done is we've created a system for ourselves to understand who's on the left and who's on the right. And what I will then now do, having created these 4 dimensions of left and right, is I want to look at South Africa's political parties and then rank each of them and say, okay, on social, political, economic, and foreign policy questions, are they on the left or the right? So let me do that for you and just tell you how the scale is going to work. So I've got the 4 biggest parties in South Africa ranked by their vote share, so the ANC, the DA, MK Party, and the EFF. And I've got the social, political, economic, and foreign policy dimensions. And I'm going to give each party a score for each of these dimensions. Now, between -5 and 0 is the left, right? Are you with me? So if we go further towards -5, you're going further and further left. But between 0 and 5, you're going further and further right. Right? So if you imagine a timeline at 0, 0 is the center, -5 is the extreme left, and +5 is the extreme right. Okay? And I'm going to rank each of these parties at either -5, +5, or somewhere in between on each of these dimensions. And then we'll take a look and see, where do these different political parties actually stand? And that, I think, will be an intervention into the debate as to whether Party X is on the left or on the right. Because what you will find if you carry on with this video is that it's actually not as simple as it seems, because some parties are on the left on some dimensions and on the right on other dimensions. And only when we amalgamate all of these different metrics can we see where they truly stand overall. Okay, so let's begin with our first dimension, the social dimension. Now, as a reminder, the social dimension is about a party's stance on social issues such as gender equity. In the South African perspective, of course, racial equity becomes crucial to the left and right because of our history of racial subjugation, which was probably the furthest right you can ever imagine on social issues, right? So the belief in racial equality and redress policies which create racial equality is on the left, whereas removing those policies is on the right. We also talk about inclusivity, the rights of marginalized groups. So questions like immigration come up here. Those groups who do not have a numerical majority, how do you defend and protect them? Defending and protecting them is largely on the left, while not offering those protections is on the right. LGBTQI plus policies, whether you embrace people within that community or you don't, that's left and right. Cool. So let's take a look at the ANC, and of course we will look at some of their statements from their manifestos, and also but just one important thing is I'm not just looking at statements because it's easy for parties to say things. I'm also going to look at their practice over the last period of South African politics. Cool. So let's come to the social for the ANC. Now, the ANC largely supports progressive social policies. Another interesting metric is the question of abortion, for example, a woman's right to choose. Again, that's another interesting metric for social. So the ANC is largely on the left on a lot of these questions. They're pro-racial justice, kind of. They are they support the LGBTQIA+ community and conferring rights on that community, protecting that minority community. Gender equality, they speak firmly about, and South Africa's parliament is actually one of the most gender representative parliaments in the world. So I would say that even though they're not very far and their racial justice position has begun to be eroded somewhat, I would put them on the left. So I'm going to give the ANC a mark of, I would say, -3. Remember, -5 is the furthest possible to the left. So they're probably between -2 and -3 for me. But let's say -3 on social policy, which means they're more to the left.
Fam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below.
Cool. So then we come to the DA. Now the DA is an interesting one because on the one hand, they claim to be liberal, and they are liberal. But when it comes to racial justice and racial redress and the historical injustices of the past, they are very much on the right, in my view. So that somewhat tempers where we can put them. So they're quite keen to confer rights on various communities. They're quite, you know what, actually, I think I might put the ANC at -2 actually, because I'm thinking about some of their immigration stances as well. So let's put them at -2. DA, immigration, they're very pro-immigration. They are pro-gender equity. The problem with the DA is largely, but even with gender equity, they're not willing to say it with their chest. They say men and women are equal, but they aren't going to advocate for policies that make sure that women, are, let's say in affirmative action, if there's a man and a woman of equal skill, they're not going to promote the woman if those two are equal because of the historical injustice of gender injustice. So I'm going to say that on social policy, I would probably put the DA at, I'd put them in the center, because although they have some liberal policies, they're also quite far to the right on race. So I'm going to give them a 0 remember, this is not a 0 saying it's good or bad, it's just where they are on the scale. So the DA is going to be at 0. Cool. So we've got the DA there at 0 now, and that's great. So with the MK party, now this is an interesting one, right? Because the MK party, I think, is on the social right. I think they're on the left on other dimensions, but this is where it becomes interesting, right? So if the DA is right in the center, in some ways, taking all the metrics into account, MK party, to be fair, we don't know much about their policies, but they did have an election manifesto, and they had a makeshift interim constitution, as it were. Former President Zuma has said things like pregnant girls will go to Robben Island. Now, some MK people may say that statement was taken out of context and inflated or whatever, but there's a very solid message. Things like alcohol. A person on the left would be give freedom to the individual and let them make their choices, right? Whereas a person on the right is like, no, the state must say this is right or this is wrong, right? The MK party is very clear, alcohol abuse, we must crack down very hard on that, and the state must play a role in that. When it comes to gender equality, the MK party may say that they agree with gender equity, but when you look at their leadership, it's like all men, right? Except for one political parties and this DSG thing. Like, the only role that you can give to a woman is DSG. Come on now. 2024 now. So MK party, I think, when it comes to social issues and social questions, socially as well, if you're appealing to authority and tradition, and old school ways of doing things, or some kind of cultural practice that needs to be preserved, you're largely on the right. And MK is very much about going back to traditional leadership, traditional values, etc. So I think the MK party is I'm going to give them a 3 as far as being on the left and the right is concerned. So MK party gets 3, ANC gets 2, -2, DA I'm giving 0, and then we have the EFF. Now the EFF, socially speaking, I think is the party that is furthest to the left. Pro-LGBTQIA plus, racial justice, very, very far and very vocal about that. Gender equity, again, in terms of all the parties, in terms of its top leadership, along with the ANC, it has the most women. So in terms of practice, that's decent. It has the zebra leadership in its top structures where for every man there must be a woman, same as the ANC. Vocal about gender equality in its policies. Internal democracy, though, has always been a concern. We've seen Floyd Shivambu leaving the party. Julius Malema obviously has retained a very firm grip internally. So their commitment to democracy internally may be questioned, but in terms of their external support of democracy, all of these parties agree that no one's calling for authoritarianism. The MK party maybe says we need a stronger leader, but I've already put them on the spectrum. But I think it's fair to say socially, the EFF is quite far on the left. So I would. Where did I put MK? I put MK 3. So I think I would put the EFF at around about a 4. Actually, I think is where I'd go. So EFF's at 4. No, -4. I apologize because that's the left. And then MK is at, I think I'm going to put them at 2. And then DA at 0. And yeah, ANC at -2. Okay, so things are shaping up. So as far as social is concerned, I would say MK is in some ways furthest to the right. You've got the DA, and then you've got the ANC on the left and the EFF further left than any of the other parties. Okay, so that's number 1. Let's come on to the political spectrum. As far as democracy is concerned, in some ways this is also linked to the social, but let's do it as a separate category. Agreement with democracy, agreement with the Constitution. The Constitution, let's say, is the center of South African politics, and you can be to the left of the Constitution or the right. To the left, you think the Constitution doesn't do enough to create equality and redistribution. To the right, you think the Constitution gives too many rights to too many people. And then do you agree with democracy or authoritarianism? Again, as far as the ANC is concerned, I would say that we can put the ANC, I would say probably on the left. And I think actually most parties here are on the left. The ANC it calls for a strong state, but it agrees with democracy. It was central in the creation of the Constitution. So again, I think I'm going to give the ANC -2, so put it on the political left. Cool. Then we come to the DA, which is, I would say, again, in a very similar place in terms of democracy to the ANC. The only thing is that I think the DA is willing to give corporations a bigger say, and therefore that can sometimes have an impact on democratic outcomes. So in terms of funding, but also in terms of the power that they are willing to give private enterprise, that can sometimes subvert democratic outcomes. But I would say let's be generous to the DA and say -2 there. They're certainly not for authoritarianism. MK party, like I've said before, I'm probably going to put them at a 0 here. They believe in democracy. They contest elections. They have contested election outcomes, but that's a slightly different thing. But the reason I wouldn't put them fully on the left as well or on the right is because I think they disagree with the Constitution from the left. They don't think it's redistributive enough, and they've probably made that argument most forcefully. But on the other hand, they've also made statements that we need a strong leader, etc., which puts them more on the right. So I'm going to Combine those and put them in the center at 0. EFF, again, I think is politically to the left. Slight concerns about internal authoritarianism, perhaps. Slight concerns about everyone has to wear the same color, everyone has to do the same things and speak in the same ways. So there's quite a strict culture, but they believe in voting, they believe in elections, they don't believe in authoritarianism either. So I'm going to put them in a similar place to politically the ANC and the DA at -2. I think there's broad agreement, which is interesting, there's broad agreement in South African politics that democracy is the way to go, which I think is a good thing. Okay, economic, this is the big one, right? Where do you stand on the economy? ANC, center left in my view. What does that mean? They believe in what they call a mixed economy. So the state has a role to play, but the market also has a role to play, at least in their policy proposals. In practice, I would say they're more on the right. They're focusing a lot more these days on privatization, on unconstrained private enterprise. But there are certain, on the left, aspects like labor regulations, like the welfare state, which are really center-left policies. In terms of nationalization or major state intervention in the economy, obviously the ANC disagrees with that, so they're not on the far left, as it's often called, on that particular question. So I think the ANC can get a -1 is where I'd put them. They're just off the center to the left. The DA, here's where I think the right really comes through for the DA, because the DA believes in privatization. They believe in deregulating the labor market. They believe in constraining the power of unions. They believe in reducing tax rates. They believe in liberalization. They don't believe in a big role for the state in the economy. And so they're quite far to the economic right. And again, I'm not saying here what's good or bad. I'm just trying to put parties on a spectrum. So economically speaking, I would give the DA a 4 in terms of being on the right. Yes, they believe in welfare, so there's some concessions that they make. MK party, basically nationalization, expropriation without compensation, a lot of the same rhetoric and policy as the EFF. The state has a big role to play. Affirmative action is crucial. So I think the MK party on the economic front is to some extent quite far to the left. However, some may argue that corruption is on the right? Or at least corruption is not, there's no left platform. To be honest, there's no right platform that advocates for corruption. But if you are corrupt, then you don't really have a genuine leftist position. So a lot of people would say those who are alleged to be implicated in state capture are actually on the right of that equation. So I think we'll take off some points, but in terms of the actual policy advocate, the way they advocate for policy, I would say MK party is at least -3. And then EFF, pretty much a similar story and a similar analysis. I would put them -3 or -4. Nationalization, expropriation without compensation, redistribute wealth, etc. Not even wanting to take money from certain big political funders, although, of course, the EFF itself is funded. So, but that's why I would put them on the left. So -3, -4, but let's say -4 for argument's sake. Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel. So why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. Cool. So, where things stand right now, let's take a deep breath before we go foreign policy. Socially, furthest to the left is we've got the ANC. We've got the EFF furthest to the left, and we've got the DA, the MK actually furthest to the right. Politically speaking, we've got everyone except the MK to the left. Economically speaking, the DA is quite far to the right and the EFF is quite far to the left, and everyone is somewhere in between. Now we come to foreign policy. The ANC's foreign policy is mixed. They enjoy strong relations with the West. They are willing to push for more inclusion of the global South in global decision-making structures, but they also criticize the West, for example, in Israel-Palestine or on questions of Russia and Ukraine. They criticize foreign intervention. They were against the Iraq War, for example. They wobbled a bit in terms of the intervention in Libya, funnily enough, under Jacob Zuma. So they try to play both sides, but in large part, I would say there's still a core of the ANC that is slightly more to the foreign policy left. So I would put them at -2. The DA, here again, I think is quite far to the right. So pro-Western, anti-BRICS, sometimes supportive of foreign intervention, takes a clear position on the Israel-Palestinian conflict in support of Israel. Russia-Ukraine very strongly supports Ukraine. So you can see that their foreign policy largely aligns with Western foreign policy, and we don't hear much about the DA speaking about reforms to global institutions, etc. So I'm going to put them at probably a 3, if not a 4, I think, maybe foreign policy-wise, on the right. MK Party, we don't know much, to be honest. But as far as we can tell, in their actual policies and statements around current global conflicts and the current global system, and President Zuma's statements about BRICS and Western agendas to undermine African and South African shifts, MK Party is pretty far to the left. I'm going to say -4. And then EFF, to round up our analysis, is also extremely far to the left on foreign policy, very anti-Western expansion, very anti-NATO, very pro-Palestinian, now pro-Russian, I think, actually moves the EFF a bit to the right, because I'm not convinced that Russia is on the left. So there is a sense in which the EFF in its foreign policy is sometimes willing to flirt with authoritarianism on the global stage. And Julius Malema has signaled a certain penchant, shall we say, or a liking for some leaders which we would probably consider on the global right, actually, for their authoritarianism. So perhaps that takes EFF a notch down, but certainly in terms of global institutions, far to the left. So I'm going to put them at -4 again. Okay, so now for the grand reveal. This is where the four biggest political parties stand on the spectrum of left and right. So who is the most right political party? We've got the DA coming in with a center-right score of 1.5. Very far to the right on economics and foreign policy, but more to the center on politics and social questions. So the DA has a score of 1.5. Remember, our scale is from 0 to 5 on the right and 0 to -5 on the left. Cool. Then, interestingly, we have the MK Party, which is slightly to the left. Very much to the left on economic and foreign policy, but in the center of political policy, and then on the right on social questions. So it's got a score of -1.25. So is the MK Party on the left? Well, according to this, yes, but slightly and for various reasons. But the ANC actually comes out further to the left than the MK Party, which is interesting. So their economic policy is far to the right of the MK Party. Their foreign policy is also to the right, but their social and political position are slightly to the left of the MK Party, and that means that they are slightly still center left, but they have a score of -1.75. And then, quite far to the left, the furthest on our spectrum here, we have the EFF, which is at -3.5. And that would put it very firmly on the left. So, In this episode, we have defined what we mean by left and right. We have given you a sense of the 4 dimensions of left and right. And we have placed South Africa's top 4 political parties on the spectrum. What do you think? Of course, in many ways, these are subjective analyses because where you place a party depends on what you think left and right means. What do you think? What are your views? Would you agree with where I've placed the different parties? Would you disagree? And how would you rank parties in terms of left and right? At least now, when you watch the news or when you watch political discussions or you hear them at home around the dinner table and people talk about the left and the right, you have a view on what that means and how you can categorize it. I hope this has helped you and equipped you with some political insight in South African politics. Stay tuned to SMWX, like, share, subscribe, and thank you for keeping it locked. Aye.